We are recording. So I was saying that the question we're dealing with tonight of so much suffering in the world, if Hashem created the world and Hashem is good, why is there so much pain and suffering? Why doesn't Hashem solve that? Why does Hashem cause realities in the world where there's so much pain and there are so much pain and suffering? Why do bad things happen to good people? There are many ways to phrase and present this question. And it's a very serious question. It's a very painful question. And it's not good that it exists. It's good that it causes us pain and we are not indifferent to it. And that's part of the issue, but we will get to that. So I started off by saying that it's not, don't feel bad. Don't feel you're doing something non-religious or something which is lessening your religiosity, your belief, your faith, your being faithful to Hashem by asking this question. It's a very religious question to ask, and I'd like to show this in at least two ways. And the first one is, I'm going to share the screen for a moment. And you see here psukim from the first psukim from the prophet Habakkuk, in English spelled Habakkuk. I missed that somewhere, it got lost. The prophet is Habakkuk here in the first pasuk. Prophet Habakkuk, one of the less known of the prophets. There are, the big ones like Yeshayahu, Isaiah, Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, and then there's a book of 12 small prophets, small in quantity. I have nothing to say about their quality in comparison to other prophets. It doesn't mean anything, but small in quantity. So instead of making a book of each one of these 12, they made a book of the 12 together, and it's considered to be one of the 24 books of the Tanakh, called Treyasal, called 12, the 12 prophets. One of them, not so well known, is Habakkuk, 3 chapters. This is the beginning of Habakkuk, and look what he says. We'll read it in English. He says in Pasuk Bet, Pasuk 2, O Lord, how long will I cry and you will not hear? I cry out to you of violence and you will not save. There's violence in the world and you're not intervening. Why do you show me iniquity and look upon mischief and plunder and violence are before me? And the one who bears quarrel and strife endures. Someone who causes strife and quarrel, he wins, he endures. Where are you? Why aren't you intervening? Therefore, Torah is slackened, and justice does not go out forever. For a wicked man surrounds the righteous, therefore justice emerges perverted. And then I'm skipping a few psukim, but I didn't want to miss this pasuk 13. You are of eyes too pure to behold evil, and you cannot gaze upon iniquity. If so, if you, God, are so pure and cannot be indifferent to evil and iniquity, why should you gaze upon traitors, be silent when a wicked man swallows up one more righteous than he? If I look around in the world and I see good people and bad people, wicked people and righteous people, and I see that the wicked man swallows up the righteous man, and you're silent, you, God, are silent. What's going on? And if I go back to verse 4, so when I say that you're being silent, there are consequences to this. Torah is slackened because people in the world are asking this question. And if you show your face and if you intervene and show that you are ruling the world and you make justice, then people will what's a good word for stick to the Torah? They will cling to the Torah. But because they see this in the world and they don't see that you are intervening, so Torah is slackened. So number one, I, the prophet, am asking a question. I'm asking the question. That's A. And B, I'm saying that your cause is losing because I want Torah to be strengthened in the world. And what's happening is that Torah is being compromised because, just making sure someone wants to be here who I haven't admitted. And the fact that you, God, are not intervening and putting things right is making Torah weaker, and faith in the Torah and faith in God weaker in the world. So please intervene, not for me, so that the belief in God, the faith in God will be strengthened, will not be weakened in the world. So first of all, this is a prophet, Habakkuk. So don't feel bad that you have this question. He also had the question. Maybe this is the beginning of becoming a prophet. You know, maybe those of us who are asking this question are on our way to prophecy. It's a good thing religiously to ask the question. It's not being said in blasphemy. It's not being said in haughtiness. God, you don't know what you're doing. That's not proper. But to ask the question, to not only to ask it politely, to have the question explode within you towards God. You're directing it to the right address and saying, what's going on? Why is there this suffering in the world? Why are evildoers succeeding and the non-righteous people are swallowing the righteous people? What's going on? It's a sign of something that you really care about, that is important to you, that is significant to you. So asking the question is a good thing, not a negative thing. Another example, just to give two examples, there are many more. A second example is in Kohelet. A year or two ago, I learned how to say Kohelet in English. Ecclesiastes, did I get that right? One of those most difficult words to say in English. And Kohelet says, there is vanity that is done on the earth, that there are righteous men to whom it happens according to the deed of the wicked, and there are wicked men to whom it happens according to the deed of the righteous. I said that this too is vanity. This is hevel. This is one of the things that I see wrong in the world. What's going on? Why are good people getting things that should be deemed to the wicked, and wicked people are getting things that should be given to the righteous? Something is wrong here. So Kohelet can say, Shlomo HaMelech, or even if it was not him, but it's part of Tanakh, and prophets can say this. So it's a good thing. These are the first examples. Some other examples coming up. It's not a negative thing. It's a positive thing that this question bothers you and you ask the question. By the way, I just want to mention, not in passing, I want to mention as a balance to this question, what the prophet Yonah was bothered by. Yonah is part of those 12 prophets, that book of 12 prophets. So Habakkuk is one of them, and right next to him is Yonah. And Yonah is asking the opposite question. Yonah is asking, when God is being forgiving to people who shouldn't be forgiven, Yonah is saying, what about, giving people what they deserve in the negative sense? They should be punished. You're giving in too easily. But that's a whole different chapter. It's a whole different issue to discuss. But it's interesting that we see in the prophets both sides of this coin. Sometimes saying, wait a minute, why are bad things happening to good people? And sometimes saying, why aren't you punishing the people who should be punished? You're not punishing them enough. And you shouldn't give in so easily. You shouldn't forgive them so quickly and so easily. So we have different kinds of question towards providence, towards the way that it seems to us that Hashem is running the world. And then the question is, what am I expecting? What do I expect in a shiur like this one tonight? If I said to you, everyone is invited to a shiur, all the biggest questions about why do bad things happen to good people, why is there suffering in the world, I am going to give you the complete and perfect explanation. If I saw a headline like that, I don't think I would go to the shiur just to argue with him. I think I would, in advance, I wouldn't go there. I would think that someone who thinks he has answers to questions that are greater than what human beings can reach a full comprehension of it. And I would think, I wouldn't have a positive expectance of that shiur. So I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to claim that. What I'd like to do is not give complete answers to these questions. Hopefully, if we succeed, we will have some food for thought, some directions of things that we could use, ideas that we could use to try and deal with these issues in a way that can be significant for us and maybe make some progress, some steps forward in thinking about these questions. One of the questions that Avi asked, I'm just checking every once in a while if anyone else is there trying to get in. One of the questions that Avi asked 2 weeks ago was, doesn't the way a person treats Emunah, faith, isn't it influenced by his own personal experiences? And I said then, and I say now, on the one hand, clearly the answer is yes, it's influenced, but on the other hand, absolutely no, it's not determinist. It's not that if every person who has a certain experience reacts in the same way. Two people can have the same pain, the same suffering, or see a loved one having the same pain and suffering, and each one of them will react in a totally different and even opposite ways. So it's not determined, it's not predetermined. We do have the freedom of choice. We do have the option of stopping and thinking and choosing the way we are going to react, and that will be significant in some of the sources that we will see probably also tonight and also in 2 weeks, because I don't think we'll get through all of it tonight. I'd like to quote from a very fascinating source. And it's a book. Here's the book. This is the book. Let me see. Where is my picture so I can see if you see it properly. Faith After the Holocaust, Rabbi Professor Eliezer Berkovitz. Rabbi Berkovitz was a rabbi in Germany before the Shoah, for the Holocaust, managed to get out of Germany to Switzerland, and in that way was saved from the Holocaust, and then to the United States, and then to Israel, and died and is buried in Israel. And of a few books that were written or speeches that were given or things like that dealing with the Holocaust, I find his book to be very deep and significant and inspiring in a way. If you want to read the book, put aside time, get good amounts of energy before. It's not a book to read, it's a book to study. I'm sorry that I can't share the screen and show you the quote, because I haven't found the book online. And I took about 4 pages and marked the parts that I want to quote, but I would have to letter by letter print them up to put it together. I actually contacted his son today, his son, who I happen to know, of Dov Berkovitz, and asked him if he has the source in English on the computer in a way that I can pass it on to you. So maybe, until now, he said, I'll try to help you, but not yet. Hopefully in the future, maybe, in a few days or even tomorrow, he'll get it to you. So I will be able to share it with you once I get it. And but right now I don't have it in front of you. I will quote, and I'm sorry it's not as good as when you see it, but I will try to give you the idea of what he's saying. But beforehand, Eliezer, you wanted to say something, Eliezer, when you want to speak, please behave not like Eliezer and just, how do you say, interrupt and just speak. It's an open crowd and an open discussion.
Well, of course, this is a very important point that everybody thinks about. And I don't want to say about how the evil do well and the good people do poorly, but I do think that difficult situations in the world could well be a test of the community, of how to deal with, how to improve and deal with the situation. I think problems about hunger or COVID or things like that, that who knows, but it could well be, and I also think politics, but that's another issue. But it could well be a test of the society to try to see whether we're capable of doing the right thing.
I don't know, Eliezer, if you saw I don't think you have WhatsApp. I'll have to send you somehow a very short 1.5-minute video of Rabbi Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, making a point in that direction, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that idea later on. Not today, but hopefully later on as we move forward. Okay, thank you. So going back to Rabbi Berkovitz, here is my quote. I'm sorry you don't have it in writing in front of you. I will try to give you the idea. Now we can never put the Shoah aside, but I'm using Rabbi Berkovitz and what he wrote about the Shoah and speaking about this in general terms, in terms of suffering and pain in general. Of course, the Shoah is the peak of any kind of suffering and pain, but I could take a picture with my phone, that's true. And then what? And then I'd send it to everybody by WhatsApp. I don't think I could share.
You could send it to yourself, and then you could put it on the computer.
What's the name of the book?
Sorry?
What's the name of the book?
Faith after the Holocaust. See it?
No,
I'm
just, okay.
What pages are the quotes?
Okay, there are several terrific chapters here. This is chapter 3. The headline of chapter 3 is God and the Holocaust. And the subtitle or sub-headline at the beginning of chapter 3 is called Job's brother, Eov's brother. What Rav Berkowitz is saying, that each one of us who was not in the Shoah, we are like Job's brother. I was not there, I didn't experience it, but he's my brother and I'm trying to listen to what was my brother's experience. So I'm not going to take the time now, Eliezer, thank you, I'll think of that idea for the future. I'm not going to take the time now and take a picture of it until I put it all together. It'll take 10 minutes. So I'm going to start reading. For numerous Jews, the Jewish fate in the death camps led to a crisis of religious faith. Of course, the Shoah for many Jews created a crisis of religious faith. Again, I'm relating to what Avi raised. On the one hand, for some people, it created a crisis. For other people, it created a strengthening of religious faith, which is fascinating. Our concern here is with the authentic form of the quest, for there is also an inauthentic quest. There is an authentic way of asking this question, and there is also an inauthentic way, and he's going to use a stronger word soon. And he says, sometimes there are people who reject faith in God before the Holocaust, and then when they raise the question of God's silence at Auschwitz, it is done with the impure intention of proving how right they were all the time. He says that's the inauthentic quest. They are not questioning something, they're using something that happened to prove I was right all along. And he says one must approach the problem of faith in the agony of one's soul. People who didn't believe and now are using this to prove that they were right, it's not coming from the agony of soul. It's almost, I would say, excited to prove my point. The question comes from an agony of the soul. He who approaches the problem cleverly, in a clever way, using it as proof, vulgarizes. That's the stronger word I meant before. He's saying if you use the Holocaust or any other pain inflicted upon people in a way to say, see, that proves my point that there is no God, or there is no nothing seeing over the world, that's using it in a vulgar way. Only the believer in the living God of Israel is involved in the crisis of faith. For him, it's a real crisis. And says Rabbi Berkowitz, don't be afraid of asking the question. The reasoning with God, reasoning in the sense of you're trying to reason on level, you're trying to discuss this with God, discuss with him what is going on. This reasoning with God is a need of faith. It's not against faith. It's a need of faith. It issues from the very heart of faith. Faith, because it is trust in God, demands justice of God. It cannot countenance that God be involved in injustice and cruelty. It's because of faith in God, and God is just, that it cannot accept that there is injustice and God is not intervening. It's because of faith that the question comes up. What faith is searching for is, if not to understand fully, at least to gain a hint of the nature of God's involvement. I would say maybe that's what we're trying to do. I'm not trying to achieve full understanding. I didn't say before, when the famous story about Moshe Rabbeinu, when he says to Hashem, show me your glory, or show me your kvodecha is the word in Hebrew. And Hashem says to him, go stand in this crevice over here in the mountain, and some of my divine presence will pass by, but you won't be able to see me, because a man cannot see me and live, but you will see me after I pass by. And the rabbis say that what Moshe was saying is, give me an answer to the question of tzaddik veralo rasha v'tovlo, a righteous person suffering, being punished, inflicted with pain, a wicked person having a good life, and so on. And Moshe Rabbeinu could not achieve the answer to that question. So the rabbis are saying, everybody asks this question, even Moshe Rabbeinu, but even he couldn't find an answer. So we're not trying, going back to Rabbi Berkowitz, to understand it fully, but to gain a hint of the nature of God's involvement. This questioning of God with the very power of faith stands out as a guidepost at the earliest beginning of the Jewish way in history. This position of questioning God because of faith is something that's there as a guide, as a post from the beginning of the Jewish way in history. Because the first Jew, that's what he did. Avraham wrestled with God over the fate of Sodom and Amorah. So, and Avraham said to God, a God who is just won't do justice, will do injustice. So Avraham stood there and challenged God about this issue. And so the point Rabbi Berkovitz is making is, look, this is not against faith. This is the way of Judaism to challenge God and discuss, so to speak, reason with God, what's going on here. There is no contradiction here. The man of faith questions God because of his faith. It is the faith of Abraham in God that cannot tolerate injustice on the part of God. This is also the essence of Job's dilemma, Iyov. The sustained fire, if you read the book of Iyov in the Tanakh, 40-something chapters, and you go through lengthy arguments, and Iyov's friends saying to him, come on, stop it. You're being punished. You did wrong. You sinned, and God is punishing you. And he says, no, I challenge God to explain to me what's wrong. What did I do wrong? I didn't do anything wrong. This is unjust. And another friend comes, and the argument goes on and on and on for 30-something chapters. And Iyov does not give in. And says Rabbi Berkovitz, the sustained fire of his plaint, of Iyov's plaint, is not derived from his personal plight, but from the passion of his faith. It's not because of his own personal situation that he's struggling here. It's because of his faith in God. There is no weakening of faith here. On the contrary, it is the very power of faith that lends force to the accusation. What the friends attempt to do is to defend a wrong as justice. Iyov insists this is wrong. By saying this is just, you are defending a wrong as justice. By doing so, without being aware of it, they degrade Iyov's idea of God. Because of his faith, Iyov cannot accept a defense of God that implies an insult to the dignity of God in whom he believes. I'd rather live with a very difficult question than to compromise my belief in what God really represents. Sorry, I'm enabling some other people to come in. I think I got everybody. Okay, so the compromising your understanding of God, giving an answer or accepting an answer about injustice, which is compromising God's absolute justice, is worse, says Rav Berkovitz, than remaining with a question, or even for 30-something chapters arguing about it and challenging or reasoning with God, demanding that God come to trial with you, so to speak, as Iyov does. That's better than compromising and saying, well, God's justice is not complete. So it's because of faith in God that Avraham and Iyov maintain this argument. The questioning of God's providence is within the classical tradition of Judaism. To this day, theologians are arguing about the meaning of God's answer to Iyov. At the end of the book of Iyov, God reveals himself and speaks to Iyov. When God speaks to Iyov, he does not say, okay, get out your notebook, I'm going to explain everything to you. He doesn't say that. He says, you don't understand. He says, you weren't there when I created the world, and there are a lot of things about the world that you don't know, and you're not going to understand this. So the theologians discuss and argue what is the meaning of God's answer to Iyov. But one thing is certain. In the denouement, God appears to Iyov. He makes himself known to him. Thus, Iyov is able to find peace with God. No such denouement to the drama of faith took place in the Shoah. Iyov had some kind of answer. The answer was not, I'll explain to you, but the answer was, I'm here. And that for Iyov was enough. But the people in the Shoah didn't even get that answer. And when we see suffering in the world, even though we are not Iyov, we're Iyov's brother, as Rabbi Berkovitz puts it, we don't get that kind of intervention, that kind of revelation that Eov got. And then he says there were two kinds of Eov at Auschwitz. You know, in the book of Eov, in the beginning, when he's suffering, his wife says to him that, why don't you just turn your back on God and accept his wrath? And Eov says, no, I will not do that. I believe in God. I'm not going to turn my back on God. And there are people in the Shoah, says Rav Berkovitz, who accepted Eov's wife's advice and did that. And there are those who, to the very doors of the gas chambers, walked to their death defiantly singing, Ani Ma'amin, I believe in God. In other words, this was their defiance of kind of saying to God, even if you do the strongest, most powerful things in history to make me turn my back on you, I will not turn my back on you. So these are two kinds of Eovs with two kinds of reactions. And I said before, there were some people who not only didn't lose their faith during the Shoah, but Dafka found their faith during the Shoah. But in any case, Rav Berkovitz is making the point that each of these is being authentic. This is authentic. This is not someone who had an opinion before and is using someone else's suffering to prove his point. These are people who are being, what was the word that he used? He used the word, this is authentic. So very often in life, I meet people who say to me, because of this, it could be the Shoah, it could be other things, I don't believe in God. And I'm not sure, I can't say in any definitive way about any one person, but I think there are deeper ways of dealing with this and questioning and seeking understanding and seeking tools to at least deal with this, or more meaningful ways to deal with this than just to say, because of this, I don't believe in God, although I cannot be judgmental of the decisions that other people make. And he continues, Rav Berkovitz, that the people who do not lose their faith, this person desires to affirm, someone who wants to continue with his faith in God in face of suffering, Shoah or anything else. He desires to affirm his belief, but not by behaving as if the suffering had never happened. I want to affirm my belief in God, my faith in God, but not by ignoring the suffering. If his faith is to remain meaningful, he must make room for the impenetrable darkness within his faith. There has to be some darkness in my faith that I can't get there, I can't penetrate that. And I have to include that somehow within my faith, because I can't ignore the suffering and look the other way. I can't make believe it doesn't exist. So if I want my faith to be, again, I'm losing the word. If I want my faith to be authentic, and at the same time not to ignore these questions, I have to have faith, not because I have answers to these questions. I have to find a way for my faith to remain meaningful and make room for these impenetrable darkness, these places of darkness that I can't penetrate within my faith. The inexplicable will not be explained, yet it will become a positive influence in the formulation of that which is to be acknowledged. Eliezer, this goes well with what you said before. The inexplicable will not be explained, but I will turn it into a positive influence, a positive part of my faith. The sorrow will stay. The pain for my suffering or someone else's suffering will be there. It will still be there, but I will become blessed with the promise of another day for Israel to continue on its eternal course with a new dignity and a new self-assurance. Even the pain of the Shoah will be there. We will continue with faith and with the pain in a way that we will make this pain, turn this pain into something that will be constructive, that will be a meaningful part of our faith, even if what we are achieving is not an answer. Maybe it's a way of turning this pain into something meaningful. Here is a good time for other people to speak up if they want to.
I'd like to say something, if I may. Your heretic is speaking. At the end of, there's a tremendous difference at the end of the book of Job, and we had this discussion today with Rabbi Ben David, Everything is restored to him. He gets all his animals back, double the number. He gets his family back. He gets everything back. What do the people from the Holocaust get back? Nothing.
Certainly. The people of the Holocaust, of Berkovitz says it himself. It's more difficult than Job, I'm told to pronounce. It's more difficult than Eov.
Yeah.
It is. I absolutely agree. It's the most challenging question in the history that I am aware of. Absolutely. And we will deal with it separately in this series. But for now, yes, but even that, what Rabbi Berkovitz is saying after the Shoah is it is our responsibility to be asking these questions. And I'm taking from him that not only about the Shoah, people weren't asking this question only because of the Shoah. It has existed throughout history. And it's something that's there that is inexplicable. It's not going to become something that we understand, but we have to find a way not to ignore it, not to turn our head the other way, and at the same time to include it within our faith somehow in a meaningful way. And that goes with what Eliezer was saying before and what Rabbi Sachs was saying. It's God is challenging us. Not that explains to me, oh, if I was God, I would do the exact same thing. But in a way, God is saying to us, okay, there's pain and suffering in the world. Wake up. It's your role to try and heal that and try and make the world a better place. So if we take that responsibility as a partnership with God, I don't have total answers to the questions. And I would say, oh, sure, if I would do exactly the same thing, I can't say that. But at least I turned the question into something which is a meaningful part of my religious life and my religious experience.
May I say something here?
Absolutely.
Hello to everybody. My name is Rochelle. I live on Masot Yitzchak, not in Ra'anana. And I'm here through David Gorin, if you know, who's an old family friend. I just wanted to make a comment that I very much enjoy listening to Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky, who's a psychiatrist and a chassid. And I once heard a drasha that he made, and he talked about suffering. And I hope I get the quote right, but he said, and it was amazing to me that Babover Chassid would even say this. He said, if there is a God, that amazed me. If there is a God, then suffering makes no sense. But if there is no God, then nothing makes any sense. And I just am, you know, what you're saying, Rav Tzvi, kind of reminded me of that we can't have the answers. We won't have the answers even if we want them, but still we can find ways to ask them and believe.
And if because of these questions, I will say two things in continuing what you were saying. One was I was saying before, if we choose these because of these questions to lose our faith, we're not gaining anything.
Right.
And two, and continuing what you were saying, it's also, I would say it's kind of, it goes back to things we were discussing in previous shiurim. It's also saying, listen, I understand better. It's one thing to say I'm trying to understand. And I'd like to understand that I firmly believe I can grow in my understanding, but up to a limit. I am a human being. And so I will try, I will ask the questions because I'm trying to grow in my understanding, but there is a limit. So I will accept at the end, at the bottom line is, yes, I will accept there are some things that don't make sense? But sense is my sense. And it's not totally objective. It's not, even if we all agree and it's not God. It doesn't make sense to us, maybe, or maybe we can make partial sense of it.
Mm-hmm.
Robert, see, I think your choice of the Shoah to illustrate the issue of why do bad things happen to good people is, of course, a very extreme choice, the most extreme choice that could possibly be made.
Right.
There is a spectrum of things that happen to people. And somewhere along this spectrum, we sort of lose the ability to perhaps be objective about things. And I would ask in relation to the Shoah, some people have said, of course, that one of the results of the Shoah is that we live here rather than where we would have lived otherwise. However, we can ask, was this really necessary? Was it necessary to go to this incredible, horrific extreme to get to where we are now? Wasn't there perhaps another way? Very challenging.
I really agree. And I would say even when we discuss the Shoah in and of itself, maybe I will even bring such articles where rabbis try to explain it happened because of Zionism, or it happened because of denial of Zionism, or it happened in order to strengthen Zionism and whatever. And then you have Arav Yehuda Amital, who himself was in the Shoah and survived and came to Israel and was a Rosh Yeshiva in Israel. And he would not accept any explanation of the Shoah, because he said, any explanation you give me will not justify these measures that we saw in the Shoah. Absolutely, but I'm not, actually what I'm doing is, if I could, I would even not mention the Shoah here and just mention Rabbi Berkovitz and his thoughts. But his thoughts were, where I met him at least, were about the Shoah. And I'm not really discussing the Shoah now, I'm just, because the same concept, the ideas that he's saying, it's not only the Shoah that I can't understand. Of course, the Shoah is way beyond any other suffering, but also lesser things. There are things that I can't explain, I can't understand, and I have to, and yet, what I'm saying is that asking the question is a religious activity. It's not a non-religious. It's not questioning religion. It's not heretic. It's not blasphemy. It's not any of these negative words. It's actually coming from a religious conviction that I must ask these questions. Now I understand that other people can react otherwise and say, don't ask the questions, you're not going to get any answers anyhow, or it's dangerous to ask the questions. But I connect very much to Rabbi Berkovitz saying, I'm so religious, I have to ask this question. And I think that's an important point to make, because we all do ask this question. So at least have an option of seeing your question. I identify with it. Everyone has their own free choice, but at least have the option of experiencing this question as religiosity and not as something which is counter to religiosity. I think that's the main reason why I'm coming to it.
I think also perhaps the point can be summarized very succinctly by the quote. I don't remember who said this, but it's very succinct. And the question is, where was God? And the answer is, where was man?
Which goes back to what Rochelle was saying. You can ask questions about God, but you can ask questions about man. And then what are you left with? Okay, but I want to leave the Shoah for a separate time and go back to the question of other kinds of pain and suffering as well. So let's move on to another source. And this will probably be the last one for tonight. I have two more sources for tonight. One of them, which I really like and I want to get to, but we'll have to wait for 2 weeks, for 2 weeks' time to see that one. And now we're going to see a source that I'm honestly not so excited about. It's the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim. I love the Rambam in many ways, but I'm not sure about this one. And we'll read it together, and it's food for thought. I do think that what the Rambam says here carries weight and value, but I can't say that I fully identify with it or find the answers that I'm seeking here, but let's see what he says. You see the sources in Moreh Nevuchim. Moreh Nevuchim has 3 sections. So section C, chapter 12. In any case, I did find Guide of the Perplexed on the internet, but not Faith After the Holocaust. So here is the Rambam, part of the Rambam's chapter about this issue. Men frequently think that evils in the world are more numerous than the good things. He says that's wrong. Not only common people make this mistake, but even many who believe that they are wise, which is kind of cynical. But he says even wise people, or people who think that they're wise, or people who are learned, think that there is more suffering in the world, there's more evil in the world than good things. And the Rambam very emphatically disagrees with this. The origin of the error is to be found in an ignorant man believes that the whole universe only exists for him, as if nothing else required any consideration. If, therefore, anything happens to him contrary to his expectation, he at once concludes that the whole universe is evil. If, however, he would take into consideration the whole universe, form an idea of it, and comprehend what a small portion he is of the universe, he will find the truth. Man's existence is nevertheless a great boon to him, and his distinction and perfection is a divine gift. I wondered about the word boon. That's what I found on the internet. Anyone want to explain to me the word boon in English? That man's existence?
Benefit. It's like a benefit.
A benefit. Okay, thank you. I looked it up in Hebrew, in translation to Hebrew. But I guess what the Rambam is saying here is, listen, if you think of, this is my expectation of life. Everything should be comfortable. Everything should be good for me. I'm here now. God make life good for me. And then you don't get what you want, so you start making lists of what was good, what was fun, what was pleasure, what was pain, and you can come to the conclusion that there's more pain than pleasure. There's more evil than good. And he says that's wrong. The story is about the world. You are a small part of it, and your existence is a gift. And be grateful that you exist, and don't assume. I would say, where do you start the story? Do you start the story with, I'm here, now let's see how you're going to run the world? Or do you start the story with, well, you don't have to create me. I'm here. You gave me some good things. Thank you. Let's start the story from there. So certainly a question of perception. Your point of view, your perspective, the way you look at the world is a very main influence on how you perceive how much pain there is or how less pain there is in your life and other people's life. So I don't think this is enough, but I think there's value to this point. The Rambam continues. Please interrupt at the moment you want to, or share or participate, not interrupt. It's an open discussion. The Rambam continues.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. But life isn't like this. Life is is very subjective. A man looks upon his existence in his own way. He doesn't look at the existence of the world. If something bad is happening to me, right, it's affecting me. It's not affecting what's going on in the world. So people look at life in a very subjective manner.
Well, I think the Rambam that's certainly true, but I think the Rambam would say, but what is the basis, what is your basic understanding that causes you to look at it this way? Is that the whole truth? Isn't there a much broader truth about what's going on in the world than the part that you see, even seeing yourself? The part that you are noticing is partial. You're not noticing everything. You're not noticing everything that are there. Let me give a small example. If a person is born with some kind of deformity, is that a good word in English?
Yeah.
Something physically deformed or missing, other people have 10 fingers and this person is born with 9 fingers. Is the only possible perspective to say, oh, this is unfair, I'm suffering? Or is another possible perspective to say, wow, God gave me 9 fingers, thank you. So I'm not saying it's objective, and I'm not one to say, because I have 10 fingers, God, but
it depends very much on whether
10 fingers, and I don't have a tail, which is a bummer, because if I had a tail, I could climb like monkeys. So maybe I should be kvetching that I don't have a tail, So I do think, I do connect to the Rambam in the sense that there's, like you said, there's a lot of subjectivity here. Well, let's try to look at it in a little broader perspective. Leslie?
I think that it depends very much whether you're a glass half full or a glass half empty person. He's fine. He can look at it from a philosophical point of view, but the ordinary man in the street is looking at it from his subjective point of view.
Who do you want to be? Do you want to be the ordinary woman on the street, or do you want to be a disciple of the Rambam and try to grow in that direction? I'm not saying it's a given. You don't just, it's not a button, you press the button, you have this attitude. but is there a possibility that we can think of, as I said, food for thought, that we can think about what he's saying and try to train ourselves and work on it?
Yeah, we can all work on it, that's for sure. But you know, if something bad happens to somebody, they don't say, "Oh, well, I'm very sorry that how it's affected the world." I'm thinking, "Oh, woe is me."
I would make another point also. It depends a lot on the education that the person has been given. Some people are not trained to try and think and grow and work on things, and they don't have the tools to do it. And it's very difficult for them to grow to a place where they can achieve these tools. And another thing is there's a difference between different levels of suffering. There is suffering where you can retain your thinking and your comprehension and personality and work on things. And there's suffering where it's just so overwhelming that you just can't do anything besides suffer and feel pain. Going back to the Holocaust as an example, again, maybe I should leave it for when we discuss that, but I'll just mention this. The Piaseczna Rebbe, a well-known Rebbe from outside of Warsaw, who was in the Warsaw Ghetto and wrote his sermons that he said to the Jews in the ghetto, gave a sermon on Chanukah Tafshin Bet. Tafshin Bet, it was probably 1941. It was probably December 1941. I would have to look up the date of Chanukah of that year, but it's probably 1941. He survived in the ghetto until November 1943. But he wrote something.
Tafshin Bet sounds like 42.
Tafshin Bet, yeah, but the Jewish year moves a few months before the Gregorian year changes the number. So December of 41 is Chanukah of Tafshin Bet.
Sure.
Like right now, we are already in Tafshin Pei Aleph and still in 2020. Okay, but in any case, in 1 year in Tafshin Bet, he gave a sermon and wrote it up about, in the past when we read about suffering, we thought people should deal with it. Now when we're suffering, we should be able to deal with it. A year later, he writes a footnote and he says that was true a year ago, it's no longer true now. The situation has become so much more difficult that I can't even say this anymore. And then in the last year of his life, I don't know if he wrote his sermons and we didn't get them, or he gave up and didn't give his sermons anymore, because we have his sermons until the end of Tafshin Bet, and he was murdered more than a year in the beginning of Tafshin Dalet. So it's horrible, it's terrible, it's intriguing, but in any case, certainly it depends on the kind of suffering. This all has to do with a source that I'm looking forward to studying with everyone in the next shiur. But there are situations, instead of my choice, I have questions about the Rambam as well. And there are situations in which I would say this is not relevant, but there are situations where this is relevant. And for myself, there are situations where this can be significant. And if I can use it and work with it as a tool to try and deal with things in a more constructive way, I'm thinking maybe several other people, maybe not everyone, not in every situation, but many people in many situations can also use this as a tool for something to work on, even if it's not just an automatic, it doesn't work just like that. It's an option to try and work with.
I think what you're leading to as well is that any individual, we all suffer, setbacks and grief, and we all have the ability perhaps to take those as personal issues, but we also have the ability to generalize those issues and say, look, now I understand a little bit more. I can be a little bit more empathetic to other people who have the same situation. One of the things, and then reach out from our own experience to try to help other people who may find themselves in similar situations. And one of the most amazing things about this society that I find in Israel is, the number of funds, the number of activities that people have started based on their own suffering is extraordinary. You have so many activities, so many Karens, so many amutat that are founded based on somebody's suffering, that attempts to alleviate a person's suffering through the helping of others. It's astounding. in this society.
By the way, I would also mention that there is a surprisingly large number of Israeli initiatives for making the world better outside of Israel, that go from Israel out to the world. And I once suggested to a certain newspaper where I have a friend who's one of the editors of a certain, the more kind of philosophical section, and I suggested to him to make a series about Israeli programs that are working outside of Israel to make the world better. He said, interesting idea. Never did anything with it, but I still think it's an interesting idea to highlight and give us some thought about why are we like this? Maybe because we don't ignore this question, we don't have answers, but at least let's try and make a difference and make some good things happen in the world.
Hi. I think there's a big difference between, looking at something extreme or even large or multi, and looking at something much more personal. And I think that when most people say, why do bad things happen to good people? They're treating it in a very personal way. And very often it's because something has happened in their family. Chas v'sholom, you lose a child. I mean, this is like the worst thing for most people. And it's too hard to say, it's too hard to say the child did something so wrong that the child should be punished, or that I've done something so wrong that I should be punished by losing my child. I mean, it's. I think people have probably that's the hardest thing for most people to come to grips with, I suspect. Now, as Mark highlighted, there's a huge number of people here who have tried to work from that and say, well, so I've suffered, but maybe the next person should suffer less. And can I do something about that? I mean, that it was hard to take any sort of conclusive takeaway from the shiur with Rav Ben David that Leslie and I were in today on Eov. It was very interesting, but it's extremely tough. It makes Kohelet seem happy, and Lamentations seem happy. I mean, it's dreadful, and I can only account for it as an allegory because I cannot accept. I mean, this goes beyond I feel like I have strong Emunah. It goes beyond my Emunah to believe that something so torturous would be done for only a side bet with the Satan. I mean, but the only sort of good thing I got out of it, which is similar to something that we just said, was the source from Rav Soloveitchik in Kol Dodi Dudek. Dufek, sorry. And one way to paraphrase his sort of conclusion or ending about Eov is to say that Hashem got Eov to see at the end that for all the good, tzedakah and, great things that he did sort of in general, that the way he was not helping his closest friends who were arguing with him to get through the tragedy of it. And at the very end, when he helps them make sacrifice, they bring a korban, then that gives him some atonement too. But I can only take that allegorically. It's just too extreme in the other direction for me.
I will make, I'm sorry, today I have to end at this point, and I have something else at 9 o'clock, and we will continue in 2 weeks, but I will say something, and I usually stay after the shiur if anyone wants to continue discussing, but not tonight. But I will say 2 things about what you said, Don. One of them about Eov, I agree with you. It's very difficult to accept the story with the Satan in the first chapter. The question of whether Eov is a historical figure or it's an allegory, whatever you think about that question, I am absolutely 100% sure that the first chapter is an allegory. Meaning maybe there was an Eov and he suffered and this whole argument. The first chapter is clearly an allegory and not, it doesn't work that way. No one was there to describe it. It's just a form of telling the story of how certain things work. And it's not, this is not a shiur about Eov to start analyzing what is the point of that story, which also makes me think that the whole book is an allegory. But even if the whole book is not an allegory, the first chapter is an allegory for sure. I agree with you. I cannot accept it in any other way unless you prove to me that I'm wrong. And the other point is what you said about Rav Soloveitchik, I think goes very well. It's not surprising. He was a big Rambamist. That it goes well with this first paragraph of the Rambam that we've seen, in the sense of it's up to you. You know, and not only up to you in the sense that you have different paths that you can choose from, but it's a responsibility. When you are given gifts, Rav Soloveitchik says, you have a responsibility to do something good with it. When you are given pain, you have a responsibility to try and deal with it in a way that will make something positive come from it. And that's an interesting attitude. And we will, maybe I wrote down to elaborate on that a little more next time. And also, by the way, the third point about losing a child, I agree that's the most difficult thing to make anything of it, make any sense of it. But like you said, in Israel, there are people who have done that, and they're very impressive people. I would not say great, it's so good that it happened. It doesn't help me explain why God did it. But at least it also gives it a certain constructive side and not only the painful side. But I'm sorry, I will have to stop here tonight. In 2 weeks, we will continue with the Rambam. We're in the middle, and we will move on to another source of a story, a portion, a whole kind of chapter, not a chapter, a whole series of a discussion in the Talmud in Brachot about people who suffer. Is there such a thing of suffering which is just God causes you suffering because of love? Can it only be a punishment, or can it also be out of love? And what does it mean if God, because he loves you, makes you suffer? That's for 2 weeks from now, Be'ezrat Hashem. So Laila Tov, thank you everyone for participating.
Laila Tov, thank you.
And
Tada rabba. Thank you very much.
Be well, be healthy, be well.
Keep safe.
Thank you all.
Sehr gesund.
Oh, where's the cameraman? The one that you want, Liz?